Hi there, it's Rob here at Rule 303. I wanted to talk today about researching your ancestors in respect to World War One. So, World War One, obviously, as we all know, was one of the biggest conflicts known in the history of mankind, really. Surpassed by the Second World War, of course, in terms of loss of life and so on. But the First World War, what made the First World War unique, really, for the average person, certainly in the UK, was the volume of the slaughter was such that virtually every street had a casualty or multiple casualties, and that really seared the war into the public consciousness, into the psyche of the everyday person. Because when people die in wars, I mean, like these days in recent wars in things like Afghanistan and Iraq and so on and so forth, you always seem quite far removed from the casualty unless that casualty is directly related to you or you know them. You don't, people, as a general rule, because the casualty rate is relatively light, and I say that with deep respect to the people who have fallen or been wounded, but in respect to World War One or World War Two, the casualty levels in terms of numbers are correspondingly fairly light, thank God. And I think what that means is that the majority of people aren't actually experiencing the loss that the loved ones clearly are. For those loved ones, it's devastating in ways I can't comprehend. But for the majority of us, we just think, well, you know, there's a casualty, that's a shame, and then pay our respects in however way we do, and you know, and be patriotic and thankful for the sacrifice. World War One was different in the sense that everybody knew somebody directly, you know, in your face. It was your dad, it was your brother, it was your uncle, you know, and everybody suffered more or less, and it touched every household. And the legacy of that is that even over 100 years later, it still somehow resonates with us. And people who aren't even interested in military history will find themselves really drawn to the story of a distant relative who fell in the First World War. And I've got real affinity with that, because when I was very young, and I'm talking 3 years old, my grandma gave me a medal. It was a death plaque for my great-grandfather, David Willock, her dad. And I can always remember the words she said. She said, "Look after this, it's really important." And I didn't really understand what the hell it was, because I was 3. As I grew up, I realised that it was important, and I started to do some research. And it was around about the time I saw the internet, the advent of the internet, and it made things like this easier to do. And I didn't really know where to go. But these days, if you're researching, if you're starting on the journey of researching a relative, then you've got all sorts of resources. The caveat to this is expect to pay. Now, you don't expect to pay a lot. Well, relatively, you don't expect to pay a lot. And some of these websites will give you a free trial. Now, I'm talking predominantly Ancestry, as Ancestry's also hooks up to Fold 3, which is very military orientated. Fold 3 in regards to the way a flag is folded when it's presented to a loved one upon a service person's death. So Fold 3 through Ancestry, and the Commonwealth War Graves Commission website is also good. There's quite a few, and it may vary from country to country, although some of those websites I've mentioned are international, and you will need to refine your search down to your specific country in order to find information. Now, the First World War is a lot easier to research than the Second World War. The First World War, you know, all of the documentation from the First World War has now been released. It's over 100 years. You know, it's readily available. The problem being that a lot of it got burnt in the Blitz. So you may well find that your relative, their records exist, and great, that's brilliant, or they may have been destroyed in the Blitz. Despite this, there are ways and means of getting around that, and really what you've got to do is just get creative. But the first thing I did was to put my great-grandfather's name into Google, and I had a link through to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. And I put his name in the search engine on that website, and sure enough, up he popped. And he was, the things with the First World War, so many people died that there can be multiple people of the same name, and especially if you're a Jones or a Smith or a, you know, a Cooper or a Thomas or something like that, your common name, you will find dozens of people with the same name that died. I was researching my other grandfather, great-grandfather, William Jones, and I found something like 15 William Joneses just in Birmingham alone who died in the First World War. So expect to do have to get deep on the detective work. But I was very lucky with David Willock. He was the only one who died with that name. And what I discovered was, very quickly discovered that he died on the first day of the Battle of Loos in 1915. So that was the 25th of September 1915. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission was also able to tell me the regiment he served in, and this was key, because what that meant was I could then look into regimental war diaries and their histories and find out a little bit more about what was going on around that time with that regiment. I went to the museum for the Royal Warwickshire Regiment, which oddly enough is in Warwick, and had the pleasure of meeting one of their curators. It was a long time ago now, and I wish I could remember his name. I'm fairly sure it was David, so big shout out to David if you happen to be watching this. And they were incredibly helpful, and for a small fee they allowed me to look at the regimental war diaries, which I did, and got the story from literally from the horse's mouth on regimental war diaries. And what I discovered was, on the 25th of September 1915, my grandfather and I think it was about 930 of his comrades, the Royal Warwickshire Regiment, went over the top as part of a large-scale extended offensive against the Germans in that region. And literally hundreds of thousands of men attacked on that day. It was most notable because of the use of poison gas, which actually in some places blew back over the British trenches and gassed around men. Where the Warwicks went over the top, or the Royal Warwickshire Regiment, 2nd Battalion went over the top, there was 2 enfilading machine gun positions a fair way distant to them, but certainly within eyesight, and they were overlooked by the Hohenzollern redoubt, which was just an absolute mine of machine guns and barbed wire and defensive fortifications, and to the south the Pope's Nose redoubt, and again that was bristling with machine guns. So the Warwickshire Regiment literally walked into just a hail of fire from those machine gun posts, but also obviously from any infantrymen that were shooting from the opposing German trenches. What happened was they got to the trench. They got to the within sight of the German trenches. They were at that point being shredded, and they couldn't get through the wire. So one of the Warwicks bravely stood up and managed to cut a way through the wire and somehow escape being hit. He was later awarded the Victoria Cross for doing that, for opening the way for the attack through the barbed wire. So they poured into the trenches, they took the trench, hand-to-hand fighting, and then they went on to the primary objective, which was the Hullock Quarry, which was behind the German frontline trench. And after severe fighting, heavy fighting, hand-to-hand fighting again, they took the quarry, which they held until around midnight of the 25th going into the 26th. The divisions either side of the Warwicks were fought back. I can't remember, I think it was the South Staffs on the right, maybe, and I can't remember who it was on the left, but anyway, those guys got fought back, and the Warwicks were in real danger of being cut off. So the Royal Warwickshire Regiment at around midnight or just after fought a fighting withdrawal basically, and what was left of the regiment ended up more or less back where they started. Muster that day when they called roll, I think it was less than 200 men answered, and around 930 went over the top at 6:30 a.m. the previous morning. So you can do the maths. There was a great deal of casualties there. They got absolutely malleted, and it was it must have been absolutely awful. So that just shows you how hooked in you can get. I mean, just telling that story just makes me feel, I don't know, scared, proud, in awe of these guys to an extent. But when you find out this information, when you do your research and you find out this information, it opens up a whole new story, and you become emotionally really invested in this, and you can lose yourself in it for days. And for a while I did. I lost myself in the story, and actually you get to the point where, even though you weren't there, you kind of feel like you sort of almost, you become very, very aware, but clearly not as aware as the guys who were fighting the battle. And what I decided to do after I'd done my research, and for years I wanted to do this and just never had the opportunity or the resources or the time, was to actually go and visit the battlefield using Google again and some really good detailed trench maps that I managed to acquire. What I did was I got the old trench maps and I overlaid them with Google Earth. And luckily for me, at that particular section of the attack, it's very rural, and there's very distinctive lanes and roads that are still there that bisect the battlefield as they did back then. And if you look at the overlay, they're exactly the same. The spurs on them are exactly the same. The curves on them are exactly the same, and you can very much pick out exact locations. And using that, I was able to then use 3 words to pinpoint the exact location to 50 yards where my great-grandfather attacked from. And it was on a little spur in the trench front line that went over a lane. And myself and my son Jacob, who's 15 years old and really interested in this stuff, we planned a little holiday for a week. So we took our little clapped out Peugeot 207 open topped coupe, and we travelled down from where we live in Stamford to the Channel Tunnel, Folkestone. Got on the train, over we went, and it took us 1 hour to drive from Calais to the village of Lewishulloch, and we were there. And I literally was able to drive more or less to the spot. I actually parked at the bottom of the lane and we walked up, and it's just open fields, and you can still see the quarry in the distance. And you're actually standing exactly where that attack happened, where that took place, and it's quiet. There's birds singing, the sun's shining. There's a couple of tractors out doing the harvest, and it's just incredible. You look across towards that quarry and you think about what happened there, and it's just so quiet. So quiet, deathly quiet. To the right, if you look, there's the cemetery, which was St Mary's Advanced Dressing Station, St Mary's ADS. There's a graveyard there with a lot of the Royal Warwickshire Regiment soldiers and a lot of other soldiers. A lot of them are unknown. For whatever reason, maybe they had to recover them later on, and they weren't identifiable. Some of them are identifiable to a regiment, but not as individuals, and some of them are not identifiable at all, but they're all buried. They're all there. They've all got a headstone. And we were lucky that we were able to walk across the field to more or less to the quarry and follow my grandfather's footsteps. And as you're walking, you become very mindful of what's under your feet. And we found, literally just on the surface, bearing in mind that this field's been ploughed, 105, 110 times, over those harvests, but you can still pick up shrapnel. We found some 303 bullets. We found a wire picket, a pig's tail wire picket that was used to hold up barbed wire. We found 2 nose caps from shells. One was a beautiful brass one with the date on it, and one was a kind of more generic nose cap, both German, but bits of barbed wire, all sorts of things, and it really brought it home to us. And there was a farmer actually we met who was just doing a bit of metal detecting on his own land, and he was very friendly, and he gave us a couple of bits and bobs he'd found, and just through kind of sign language and basic English, I was saying, sort of, do you dig? And he went, no, we don't dig. He said, if we find it on the surface, then that's fine, I'll take that. Or if it's maybe a few inches under the surface. He said, but you go deeper. He said, and you start to find things that you don't really want to find, and things that don't want you to find them. I'm talking things like bones. He went, sort of, teeth. It doesn't bear thinking about this stuff's still down there. Some of these guys were never ever found. In fact, a great deal of them, a lot of them were never found. So you have to be incredibly careful and respectful when you're doing this, and bear in mind that anything you find that is of a personal nature belongs to somebody who more than likely maybe didn't get found. They're still there. So you look over the field and you think about the quite literally the tens of thousands of men who died just in that small space alone, and that was just a very, very minute space in terms of the whole of the First World War, and it just absolutely blows you away. And I say that metaphorically, actually, because there are still a lot of unexploded munitions there. I mean, the farmers, they just pick them up and chuck them on the side of the field, but they are there. Shells, unexploded shells. And you might say, oh, they haven't exploded in over 110 years. They're not going to explode now. Well, that's not the issue. The issue, well, it could be the issue, actually. I mean, none of us are bomb disposal experts. I'm on a chance it really with a bloody 18-pounder shell, artillery shell. But the problem is with some of these shells, they are gas shells. So you do have to be careful, because if it's a dud and it's a gas shell and it's corroding, then that gas is still lethal. And if that gas starts to leak out of that shell, then it's going to screw your day up, and it's not something you want to do. I think there was actually an incident quite recently in the UK that involved some old World War I mustard gas. I think somebody chucked it in a lake to try and dispose of it and killed all the fish. So it's still really lethal, so don't do that. Leave things alone, be respectful. But you will find things on the surface of the fields that you can pick up. And just be mindful and respectful also that this land is private. It's owned by somebody. And excuse me, we were lucky enough that actually the farmers were out there, and we kind of like asked permission to walk across the fields, and they were absolutely fine. They were absolutely fine. I think they were just quite glad that we'd asked. So away we went. But I think it's always worth, if you can, seek permission to get permission. It's just as a mark of respect from the point of view of the people who own the land, because it is owned and farmed in most cases. The particular battlefield that we were walking across was, as I said, the Loos battlefield, and it's not one of the more famous battlefields. It's not the Somme. It's not, it's not one of the big battlefields of 1916-17. However, in 1915, it was bloody big. It was the biggest, and it's not necessarily a battlefield that a lot of people come to. It's not catered. There's nothing there to cater for tourists, thank God. It's a very isolated place. There's a road that goes past. It's quiet. It's in the it's way out. There's a little village quite close by, but there's a palpable sense of solitude there, and I think that's a good thing. You really get a sense of awe, I think, really, when you go to a place like that. You can't see the trenches, they're gone. Although if you look at the Google Maps, you can see like almost a ghost of a scar across the landscape, but when you're on the ground, you can't see it. But you can use the information that you've gathered to be able to go and find what you're looking for quite successfully. As long as you're careful, and as long as you really do your sums right, then you'll be able to find these places. And I really would recommend it, because it's something you can do fairly easily. It's not something that's hugely difficult to do. It's just something you've got to set your mind to do and do. And my 15-year-old son who accompanied me absolutely loved it. And when we went to the Dud Corner Cemetery, the Lewes Monument to the Missing, and we found my grandfather's name, it kind of felt like we were completing something. I mean, my grandfather died in 1915, and his wife, Minnie May, her name was, she never recovered. She never recovered. She never claimed his medals. She only had his death plaque. She never claimed his medals, as far as I know. And she herself soldiered on until my grandma and my uncle were old enough to look after themselves as kind of young adults, sort of thing. And then she killed herself because she never recovered. She never recovered from the loss of David. And that added when I found that out, that added a real poignancy to the story. It made it very, very sad. She also lost 2 children, which probably didn't help her frame of mind, to Spanish flu, I think in 1919, 1920. But to know that and to see his name carved into that tombstone, it's into that monument, which is absolutely huge when you see those names, it's just scary. Felt like something had been completed, really, that a member of the family had gone over and seen it. And it was actually my son, Jacob, who found the name. He was looking and he found the name. And yeah, it was very touching. So I think the footnote for this video really is, if you have an interest that's more than a mild interest in this sort of thing, pursue it and do it, because you will absolutely reap the rewards. But I warn you, it can be quite an emotional journey, and you'll find out a lot of things that really resonate with how these people live their lives and the sacrifice that they gave and what that meant, not just to the soldiers at the front, but to people like my great-grandmother who, you know, couldn't ever reconcile with losing her husband. And to me, that really made me think about the impact of war and how it's not just the soldiers on the front, it's everybody, it's their families, their wives, their sisters, their mums, their brothers, their dads, everybody is affected. And, you know, just why haven't we learned? why can't we learn, you know, that it just doesn't work very well? Anyway, that's another matter, I suppose. But yeah, if you have any questions on this, please put them in the comments below and I'll try and answer them. I would really encourage you to look into the history. There's never a better time than there is now, with the resources on the internet that you've got to go at. Just dive in, put in the name into the search engine and see what you find, because you may well be surprised. And all these things that we thought were lost, the advent of the internet coming along, although, you know, 20 odd years, 25 years ago now, has meant that all that information has come back to the surface and it's there for the taking, you know. And if it costs you a few quid to subscribe to Ancestry and pick it out, then do it. Thank you very much for listening. It's turned into a longer video than I want it to be. We're up to 23.5 minutes. So if you're still with me, then thank you very much for your patience. Please subscribe to this channel. Subscriptions really help me in developing this channel and making it better than it already is, which isn't difficult. Subscribe and like, they are key things. If you could do that for me, I'd be really, really grateful. Thanks ever so much, and I'll sign off now, and we'll do another video, I think, on that trip to Lewes and what that actually meant and what happened there, and I'll post some photographs and some videos of our time in France, which will kind of add a bit of realism to what I've been speaking about today. Thanks ever so much, everybody. Speak to you soon.